One of the deadliest prison camps in North Korea is called Camp 14, and among all the prisoners in this camp, 14 are school-age children. All these children are searched, and one of them is found with something, 5 grains of grain. All the children stand in a line, and one of them is ordered to come forward. She is made to kneel on the hard concrete floor and hit her head with a wooden stick over and over again. Her classmates watch in silence. The beating continues until the little girl falls to the ground, unconscious alone. The injured little girl is carried to a room by her classmates and dies that night. This little girl and the other 39 children are prisoners of Camp 14, one of the prison camps in North Korea. It has been compared to the Nazi death camps. The invisible prison. Imagine a place that doesn't officially exist. A location marked on no map, acknowledged by no government, yet holding over 100,000 souls in its grip. Deep within North Korea's mountain ranges, hidden behind layers of propaganda and state denial, lie facilities that challenge our understanding of human cruelty in the modern age. These aren't ordinary prisons. They're not correctional facilities designed for rehabilitation. They're something far more sinister, entire worlds unto themselves, where generations are born, live, and die without ever knowing freedom. Where children inherit their grandparents' alleged crimes. Where the concept of innocence has no meaning. For decades, the international community could only speculate about what happened behind those electrified fences. The North Korean regime maintained absolute silence, dismissing reports as Western propaganda. But slowly, through the dangerous testimonies of survivors who risked everything to speak, through satellite imagery that reveals what secrets the regime tried to hide, through the painstaking documentation by human rights investigators, a horrifying picture has emerged. This is the story of Camp 14, officially known as Kwangli-so, number 14, one of the most brutal detention facilities in human history. It's a story of survival against impossible odds, of escape from a place designed to be inescapable, and of the strength of the human spirit, even when subjected to systematic dehumanization. But more than that, it's a story that's still unfolding today, as you read these words, in facilities that continue to operate in complete darkness. The architecture of control. Camp 14 stretches across approximately 155 square kilometers of rugged North Korean terrain, an area nearly 3 times the size of Manhattan, yet home to a very different kind of density. This isn't a traditional prison with cells and corridors. It's an entire society built on suffering, a sprawling network of villages, agricultural zones, mining operations, and industrial facilities, all enclosed by 60 kilometers of electrified fencing. The camp's design is brutally efficient. Natural features, the Taedong River, steep mountain peaks, dense wilderness form the first barrier. Then come the man-made defenses, patrol rows, watchtowers positioned for overlapping fields of fire, checkpoints, and guard barracks strategically placed to eliminate blind spots. The fence itself stands 3 meters high, wrapped in high-voltage barbed wire capable of killing on contact. Within this perimeter exists a self-sustaining microcosm. The camp generates its own electricity, operates its own railway system, runs coal mines, cement factories, and textile plants. There are agricultural zones where prisoners cultivate rice and corn under quotas designed to be nearly impossible to meet. There are model villages, a cynical term for the crude housing blocks where prisoners live, sometimes 4 families to a single room with dirt floors and a single light bulb that works 2 hours daily. This infrastructure serves a dual purpose: economic exploitation and total control. Every prisoner becomes a unit of production, their labor extracted until physical collapse. The vastness of the facility ensures that even if someone breaches the inner perimeter, they face kilometers of hostile terrain before reaching anything resembling safety. Escape isn't just difficult, it's designed to be suicidal. Born into darkness, Shin Dong-hyuk's first memory isn't of his mother's embrace or a lullaby. It's of hunger, the gnawing, constant companion that would define his entire childhood. He was born in 1982 within Camp 14's boundaries, Delivered into a world where love was a luxury no one could afford and family bonds were overshadowed by the desperate mathematics of survival. His parents never chose each other. Romance, courtship, affection, these concepts had no place in the camp. Instead, guards selected productive workers and informants, rewarding them with promotion marriages. These unions weren't celebrations. They were breeding programs. Prisoners paired off under strict surveillance, permitted brief conjugal visits as incentives for obedience and collaboration. Any pregnancy outside this system resulted in immediate execution, both mother and unborn child. Shin grew up in a house, if you could call it that, shared with 3 other families. No privacy, no warmth, no childhood in any recognizable sense. His mother worked the rice paddies 15 hours daily. His father operated machinery in the camp's factories. His older brother lived separately, assigned to the cement plant. They weren't a family unit, they were 4 individuals who happened to share genetic material, each focused solely on personal survival. From his earliest days, Shin learned the camp's fundamental equation: everyone competes for the same scarce resources. His mother wasn't a caregiver, she was a rival for food. When she returned exhausted from the fields, he would steal her dinner ration. She would beat him for it. He would do it again the next night. This wasn't cruelty, it was simply how life worked in the only world he knew. Education and obedience. The schoolhouse in Camp 14 bears little resemblance to educational institutions in the free world. Here the teacher wears a military uniform and carries a pistol. The curriculum isn't designed to enlighten or inspire, it exists solely to indoctrinate and intimidate. Children don't learn mathematics or literature. They memorize the 10 rules of the camp, each one carrying a death sentence for violation. Shin absorbed these lessons the way other children learn their ABCs. Rule 1. Any witness to an attempted escape who fails to report it will be shot immediately. Rule 3. Anyone who steals or hoards food will be executed on sight. Rule 5. Harboring, conspiring with, or failing to report a fugitive means instant death. These weren't abstract concepts, they were daily realities enforced with shocking brutality. One morning, during the routine pocket searches that preceded every class, guards discovered 5 kernels of grain hidden on a young girl. In any other context, this would be nothing children's mischief, perhaps hunger driving desperation. Here, it was a capital crime. The teacher ordered her to the front of the classroom. She knelt on the concrete floor. He struck her head repeatedly with a wooden rod while 40 children watched in absolute silence, learning the lesson he intended. There is no mercy here, no forgiveness, no proportionality between offense and punishment. The girl collapsed. Her classmates carried her limp body back to her family's quarters. She died that night. Shin felt no sympathy, only the grim satisfaction that he'd never be foolish enough to steal food. Empathy was a luxury he couldn't afford. Survival demanded something colder: absolute compliance and emotional detachment. The machinery of exploitation. Every morning, before dawn breaks over the mountains, thousands of prisoners begin their march to work sites across Camp 14. Some head to the agricultural zones, others descend into coal mines that tunnel deep beneath the earth. Still others report to factories where they'll spend the next 12 to 15 hours operating machinery, sewing garments, or processing cement. This isn't rehabilitation through labor, it is extraction. The North Korean regime has perfected a system that transforms human suffering into economic output. Prisoners receive just enough food to survive another day of work, but never enough to build strength or contemplate resistance. The rations are calculated with brutal precision: corn, cabbage soup, the occasional handful of soybeans. If you meet your quota, you eat. Fall short, and your portion is halved. Fail repeatedly, and starvation does the executioner's work. Shin spent his teenage years rotating between the classroom and the coal mine. Underground, in tunnels barely tall enough to stand in, he would hack at the walls for hours, filling carts that other prisoners would push to the surface. The air was thick with dust that coated his lungs. Accidents were common: cave-ins, equipment failures, the occasional prisoner who simply collapsed from exhaustion and never rose again. The camp's production targets were deliberately impossible. This created a perpetual cycle. Inadequate food led to decreased performance, which led to smaller rations, which led to further decline. Prisoners withered slowly, their bodies consuming themselves until they became too weak to work. At that point, they were no longer useful. And in Camp 14, the useless rarely lasted long. The man who fell from the sky. Not everyone in Camp 14 was born there. Kim Yong arrived in his mid-40s, a man who'd known a completely different life, one of privilege, status, and relative comfort by North Korean standards. He'd been a high-ranking military officer, a vice president in a state-owned company. He'd traveled abroad, attended cultural events, enjoyed the perks reserved for the elite. Then, overnight, everything vanished. Kim's father and brother had been executed decades earlier, accused of espionage for the United States. Kim himself was just a child then, sent to an orphanage under a false identity. For 40 years, he lived not knowing his own history, the alleged crimes that marked his bloodline. Then someone discovered the truth. In North Korea's system of guilt by association-YEON-JW-J family ties are eternal chains. 3 generations can be punished for one person's alleged transgression. Kim's privileged life ended the night security forces dragged him from his home. The shock of Camp 14 nearly broke him. The man who'd once had a chauffeur now descended daily into coal mines, his soft hands blistering on the tools, his back screaming from labor it had never been conditioned for. Guards showed him no deference for his former rank. In fact, they seemed to take particular pleasure in humiliating someone who'd fallen so far. After 2 months of this existence, Kim made a decision. He stepped into the mining elevator one evening, rode it to its maximum height over 600 meters, pulled the safety pin, and let it fall. He survived, and the nightmare continued. The betrayal. Shin was 14 when the nature of survival in Camp 14 demanded he make an impossible choice, though at the time, it didn't feel like a choice at all. One night, sleeping at his mother's house as a reward for good behavior, he woke to whispered voices from the kitchen. His brother, visiting from the cement factory where he worked, was talking about escape. Their mother seemed sympathetic, perhaps even complicit. In that moment, Shin felt no conflict, no moral dilemma. The camp's rules were carved into his consciousness deeper than any family bond. Failing to report an escape attempt meant death. The equation was simple, their lives or his. He didn't hesitate. Shin walked to a nearby dormitory, woke a trusted friend, and together they reported the conversation to the night guard. To strengthen the case, Shin signed a false statement claiming he'd witnessed his mother and brother commit murder. This fabrication would prove decisive in securing execution orders. Days later, guards forced Shin to an execution ground beside the Taedong River. A crowd of prisoners gathered. Attendance was mandatory at public executions. Another tool of control through terror, they brought out his mother and brother. Shin watched as the regime he served without question extinguished their lives. He felt no grief, no guilt, only relief that he'd made the correct choice. It would be many years after escape and extensive psychological counseling before Shin could begin to process what he'd done, before the weight of that night would crash down on him with devastating force. The impossible escape, Kim's journey. After his failed suicide attempt, Kim Yong lived with a new clarity. He would escape or die trying, but he would not waste away in Camp 14. His mother, also imprisoned in the camp, understood. Despite knowing she'd likely never see freedom herself, she urged her son to seize any opportunity, to leave her behind if necessary. Her blessing became his motivation. Kim studied the camp's rhythms with military precision, the skills from his former life finally proving useful. He observed guard rotations, noted blind spots in surveillance, memorized train schedules. He developed and discarded multiple plans, each containing some fatal flaw. Then came an ordinary workday that offered an extraordinary opportunity. Prisoners were loading coal onto freight trains when someone spotted grain scattered across a wagon floor, remnants from a previous food shipment. Chaos erupted. Starving prisoners abandoned their posts, scrambling for even the tiniest kernel, ignoring the guards' shouts. In that moment of distraction, Kim discovered a narrow space beneath a metal floor panel in one of the coal wagons. He squeezed inside. The train's rumbling departure became the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. Hours passed in darkness and discomfort, each one carrying him further from Camp 14. When the train finally stopped at Gosen Station around 4 a.m., Kim emerged into the pre-dawn darkness, stole workers' clothing, and vanished. But escaping the camp was only the beginning. Kim still had to traverse North Korea's surveillance state, cross into China, navigate through Mongolia, and finally reach South Korea, a journey that would consume nearly 2 years of constant danger. The final escape. Shin's first 2 escape attempts failed. Both times, he crawled under fencing in desperate bids for freedom. Both times, he was recaptured. The second failure brought him to Camp 14 Special Detention Center, a place devoted entirely to torture, designed to break prisoners so thoroughly they'd never contemplate resistance again. The interrogators suspended Shin by his arms, wrists bound behind his back, pulled upward until his shoulders dislocated. They held him over fire, burning his legs so severely the scars would remain for life. For 4 weeks, they systematically destroyed his body. Then came 6 months in solitary confinement, a pitch-black cell barely large enough to lie down, where time lost all meaning and sanity became a daily struggle. When they finally released him back to general population, Shin knew he was living on borrowed time. His name was on the execution list. Then he met Park Young-chol, a fellow prisoner who'd seen the outside world. Park had been a privileged man before his imprisonment, educated and worldly. Together, they began planning what would be Shin's third escape, his last chance. The opportunity came while doing forest work near the outer fence. The guard tower was a quarter-mile away. Patrol gaps could be timed. As dusk approached, they made their move. Park reached the fence first and tried to squeeze through the lower wires. He touched one and electricity coursed through him. His body stopped moving, but his weight bent the wire downward, creating a gap. Shin crawled over his friend's body, felt voltage tear through his own legs, but somehow made it through. The world must KNOW. Today, satellite imagery confirms at least 5 major prison camps still operating across North Korea, holding an estimated 120,000 people. Camp 14 continues to exist, though its borders have shifted, its security enhanced. Watchtowers have multiplied. Intersecting fields of fire now cover previously vulnerable areas. Some facilities have moved further inland, away from borders, making escape even more improbable. The camps are evolving, adapting, becoming more sophisticated in their cruelty. New internal perimeters suggest authorities are isolating high-value prisoners. One facility, Camp 16, sits adjacent to North Korea's nuclear testing site. Intelligence suggests prisoners may be used for cleanup operations after nuclear tests, exposed to radiation without protection or choice. Shin Dong-hyuk survived to tell his story, though not without controversy. In 2015, he retracted portions of his original testimony, admitting he'd altered certain details, some because the memories were too painful, others because shame had distorted his recollection. Trauma experts recognize this pattern in torture survivors, whose minds sometimes protect them by fragmenting or rearranging unbearable truths. The core facts: his imprisonment, the executions he witnessed, the torture he endured, the successful escape remain uncontested. As you finish reading this account, consider, somewhere in North Korea's mountains, thousands of people are experiencing what you've just read about. They're working until collapse, starving by design, watching loved ones disappear. They're being born into a system that offers no hope of release. And they remain invisible to most of the world. Their suffering denied by the regime that inflicts it. The question isn't whether these camps exist, is whether we'll continue allowing them to.